It's a lot of work, so I'd like you to give them a hand. The other thing that is important, of course, is you put on a big thing like this, and it's not free, of course. So our sponsors, I don't know, Jenna, can you put up our sponsor list? These are the ones that really make this happen. There's a lot of costs that go into this kind of a thing. These guys are the ones that really put this together. So I'm really, and you'll see the slide later, or you see it out there. But those of you that are sponsors, I just want to say thank you. And everybody, please thank the sponsors for helping us with this. This year we also have 2 honorary co-chairs for this. One of the things that we did 2 or 3 years ago is we set up a method where we would have somebody from the Assembly and somebody from the Senate side of the state legislature help us actually reach out to their colleagues within each of those houses and help them get engaged in this. Because after all, the reason that we do the Maritime Leadership Symposium, of course, is to have some nice interaction between us and the maritime industry and the legislative body that's across the street. So these 2 honorary co-chairs done a great job this year. It's Senator Ricardo Lara and Bonnie Lowenthal from the Assembly. So give them a hand too. You're going to see both of them later. Finally, before we get right into the program here, I want to make sure that you know you're all invited to our awards reception this evening. It's at 5:30 in the Capitol Rotunda, so it's just across the street here, downstairs. And this year we've got 2 great award recipients. The honoree of merit is the Port of San Francisco that's celebrating their 150th anniversary. And Monica Wagner, who a lot of you know from several different aspects, is getting the Gary L. Gregory Lifetime Achievement Award for her work in the maritime industry around here. Both of them very deserving and a lot of fun and good times there. So let's get going with this. To kick off this year's symposium, it's my honor to invite Leslie Blakey, President and Executive Director of the Coalition of America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, up to the stage here to give our keynote address today. She hates, I found out last night, bios, so I'm going to read one. Leslie Blakey has a diverse background in public outreach, project development, policy research, and government affairs. Over the past 15 years with Blakey and Agnew LLC, which manages the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, she has overseen projects and clients primarily in transportation and the freight industry. As Executive Director of the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, Ms. Blakey has helped unite large and growing number of public and private organizations around the need for increased federal investment in intermodal freight infrastructure. She manages the coalition's work to increase awareness of the benefits of trade infrastructure development and to coordinate legislative strategy and support. You know, she's really a true leader at the federal level in advocating for federal freight policy, and she's done an amazing job of working that and continues to do so. So please join me in welcoming Leslie Blakey.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for that very warm welcome, and for not reading the entire length of the bio. You know, every time I hear it, I always think I've got to cut that thing back more. But I do want to thank especially this group for allowing me to come and be with you today. I have heard about your work over the years and have always been very impressed by this gathering. In particular, I'm especially wanting to thank a smart guy who has been a real mentor to me and who is now, let's not say retiring, but just being more particular about his professional company. And that would be Norman Fassler-Katz, who has always asked me to come out to California and speak about these issues. So Norman, are you out there somewhere? Okay, good. Well, I appreciate the fact that I have great cheerleaders for the work that we do here in this region, and that I'm able to call on many of them, Fran Inman up here in the front row, and others who are members Some of you who are here today are members of our coalition, and anyone else who is here that isn't, I invite you to connect with us in any way you can, and let's work together. I think my presence, actually, and my comments today were somehow predestined, because when I arrived at my hotel, the Citizen, and got into the elevator, I found this quote from Ronald Reagan on the elevator wall. It says, "Government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it." Well, I could probably just about stop there, because that sums up a lot of this discussion. But unfortunately for you, I will carry on. But the quote from Reagan is remarkable, because despite his anti-big government philosophy and fiscal conservatism, Reagan did not hesitate to raise the gas tax when the country needed it to pay for transportation infrastructure. In that vein, our Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors was established in 2001 to bring national attention to the need to significantly expand U.S. freight transportation capabilities and work towards solutions for this growing national challenge. We work to raise public recognition and congressional awareness of the need, and we promote the idea that we need sufficient funding in federal legislation for trade corridors, gateways, ports, intermodal connectors, and freight facilities. Progress over the last 13 years has been remarkable. In the beginning, when policymakers barely knew how to spell the word freight, we would find that we would get almost laughed out of congressional offices in Washington when we would come in and say the words intermodal freight infrastructure. Their eyes would literally glaze over. But now we have national freight policy being called for by Congress, and provisions that are actually establishing the direction for a much more coordinated freight strategic approach in the United States. This by a Congress that rarely agrees on anything. Today I'll begin by framing up why the infrastructure that supports freight is so important to our everyday lives and national competitiveness. Despite the marked progress we've made, there is a crisis facing American infrastructure. The root of the crisis is one that's familiar to any sector dependent on federal funding. There's not much to be had, and there's not much to be had, and we're living in a reality that forces tough, brave decision-making. I will speak on the changing global trade patterns and how they place new strains on the already aging system. Finally, I will talk about what Washington is doing to address these problems and outline where we go from here and what to expect in the upcoming months. As we work to recover from the Great Recession, the prioritization of transportation funding is more important than ever. President Obama, in his 2014 State of the Union, just a few weeks ago, put it best. He said, "First-class jobs gravitate to first-class infrastructure." Our nation is at a critical moment. New sources of energy, free trade agreements, nearshoring and reshoring, and the expansion of the Panama Canal are contributing to rapidly changing world trade patterns. Can America respond by upgrading its infrastructure and investing in its supply chain networks? Will Congress recognize that lofty national goals, including export and air quality initiatives, must be supported by highway, rail, air, and waterway network works that are adept at accommodating increased trade resulting from these global changes? Can Americans lobby their government officials to focus on the crumbling infrastructure they see in their communities and the rapidly choking interstates that play host to commuters and freight at all hours of the day? In September, the World Economic Forum released its annual Global Competitiveness Report, ranking productivity and economic potential for 148 countries worldwide. The report placed the United States at a respectable 5th place in overall competitiveness. However, America struggled to crack the top 20 in infrastructure rankings, indicating that our overall competitiveness is in jeopardy unless significant investment to our nation's bridges, roads, and ports are made. This warning comes on the heels of the American Society of Civil Engineers report card, which gave U.S. infrastructure a D+. The sad state of our nation's infrastructure is not news to transportation funding advocates, but the Global Competitiveness Report does offer a context in which to place the importance of infrastructure to overall economic health. The report classifies infrastructure as the second pillar of a functioning economy, only behind government institutions. The U.S. maintains its competitive edge thanks to other pillars, including flexible labor markets, highly sophisticated and innovative companies, and our excellent university system. Unfortunately, our nation is dragged down greatly by the state of our infrastructure, which is critical to a large country in which distances between regions can affect trade. For example, our northern neighbor, Canada, takes a full spectrum view of their freight network and is a constant reminder of a nation striving to enable business through strategic investment in transportation infrastructure. The government of Canada is not afraid to be accused of working hand in hand with business to leverage public investment and to achieve job growth through a robust industrial base. This map actually comes from the Canadian government's website. It's accompanied by this text, and I want to quote from the government website itself. Canada's gateways offer an efficient transportation network that spans from coast to coast, reaching deep into North America's economic heartland. The Asia-Pacific Gateway, which is the blue bubble there, facilitates global supply chains between North American marketplace and booming economies of Asia through major ports and airports, as well as road and rail connections stretching across Western Canada and south into the United States. Efficient, fast, and streamlined, the Asia-Pacific Gateway is a vital portal between North America and Asia. The central location of the Continental Gateway, that's the kind of greenish bubble in the middle, facilitates international trade with North American markets through expansive connections into the United States, as well as moving goods from Europe and the rest of the world. The Atlantic Gateway, the yellow bubble to the side, is well positioned to meet the growing demands of shifting world trade patterns. It is a world-class network of natural deepwater ports, international airports, key border crossings, and intermodal road and rail connections with direct access to major North American markets, unquote. Now, seriously, I ask you, can you imagine this kind of advanced thinking and promotional language appearing on our federal government's websites? I regret that I cannot. And actually, let me just go back for 1 second to the Canadian map there. One reason that they can be so promotional about this is that the government decided on a strategy here with this focus on gateways and drawing goods in. It's not largely, of course, for the benefit of Canadians. It's to get the goods down here into the United States where the big market is. Once they decided on that strategy, they applied federal funding to it. They reached out to the private sector partners. They worked together to build projects and smooth out all the kinks so that they are able to offer a service that we are just struggling with here in the United States. And it's just such a great example. And unfortunately, I don't think that enough of our rather inward-looking congressional leaders look north and try to see what's going on. So, while our own infrastructure continues to lag behind other nations, developments within our borders are placing further strain on an aging system. The Obama administration's 2010 National Export Initiative aims to promote the American economy by doubling exports by the end of 2014. Fortunately, we're meeting or exceeding benchmarks laid out in the program, but unfortunately, that uptick in trade hasn't been accompanied by an uptick in infrastructure investment. In 2012, exports hit an all-time record of $2.2 trillion. In the same year, 29 states set new records for export sales. The numbers are welcome, but freight transportation is the backbone of America's commerce. Without additional support, America's ability to export will stagnate, and we will lose the ability to quickly and cost-effectively move goods out of the United States. In addition to setting export goals, the Obama administration has placed emphasis on the importance of natural gas as part of a comprehensive energy policy. During his 2014 State of the Union, President Obama promised to cut red tape and help states build fueling stations that shift more cars and trucks from foreign oil to American natural gas. He called for tax breaks for natural gas-powered trucks, proposing a tax credit to offset the cost of purchasing a natural gas-powered truck compared to one that runs on diesel or gasoline. Companies are responding. UPS switched 2,700 vehicles from diesel to alternative fuel, including LNG and CNG, just this past year. Energy efficiency is not just a good soundbite, it's a competitive advantage that many private companies are gravitating towards. This is excellent news for environmental and clean energy advocates, but natural gas requires a level of infrastructure development for which the U.S. is not prepared. This lack of significant miles of pipeline, horsepower requirements, and storage additions could cause shortages and price volatility in the future, as well as logistics headaches for companies that could otherwise focus on maximizing profits and hiring American workers. Despite these concerns, investing in promoting American energy is advantageous for both political and environmental reasons. According to the California Energy Commission, greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas are 23% lower than diesel and 30% lower than gasoline. The White House plans to harness clean energy and double the fuel efficiency of trucks by 2025. The Obama administration has finalized the first ever national fuel economy and greenhouse gas emission standards for commercial trucks, vans, and buses built in the 2014 to 2018 timeframe. This is all well and good, but improving air quality cannot be examined through a singular lens. It is irrevocably linked to infrastructure investment and a comprehensive plan to restructure American energy demands. Our nation's freight network operators and cargo owners feel the effects of infrastructure choke points, but the failure to invest is felt by everyday Americans too. As you all are aware, congestion is bad and getting worse. Texas A&M's annual Urban Mobility Report estimated that in 2012, congestion in the 498 metropolitan areas measured caused Americans to travel 5.5 billion additional hours, purchase an extra 2.9 billion gallons in extra fuel, and in total, congestion cost us $121 billion between wasted driver time and fuel. Currently, 32% of America's major roads are in poor or mediocre condition, costing U.S. motorists who are traveling on deficient pavement $67 billion a year, or $324 per motorist, in additional repairs and operating costs. Besides the dollar and cents damage, the hours spent sitting in traffic cause safety hazards. We've all felt the urge to check our phones while we're waiting at a stoplight or inching along the freeway. And new laws and regulations limiting cell phone use have tried to discourage this behavior. But as we all feel mounting pressures from being stuck away from work and home, we check our emails and we call into our offices trying to make the best use of our time. There is only so much legislation can do to discourage this behavior. Some of it has to be attributable to better infrastructure. Furthermore, even as technology increases the temptation to multitask, it's also changing the mindset of consumers. We now expect same or next day delivery every time, thanks in part to the evolution of two titans of e-commerce, Amazon and Walmart. These and other direct-to-consumer companies are creating pressure on the supply chain as new warehouses are being built by retailers trying to compete by getting closer to urban centers. The result is an online sales ecosystem that relies heavily on updated, capable infrastructure to quickly service customers with the same level of one-on-one attention as shown in traditional retail outlets. Changes in day-to-day life, whether it's the cost of congestion or the introduction of smartphones to our daily commute, or expectations about the efficiency of e-commerce, are all changing goods movement patterns within our country. By 2050, the United States population, currently at 317 million, will expand will expand by 140 million, give or take. All of these people need stuff. They will need jobs. They will need food, medical supplies, and clothing, all of which must be supplied over the transport networks we are building today. Other new trends in supply chains suggest additional pressure will be placed on the United States infrastructure. For decades, American companies saved money by sending manufacturing and IT work overseas, particularly to low-cost countries like China. However, as wages in China have increased, companies have begun to move manufacturing back to the United States, or at least North America. Reshoring and nearshoring allow for product flexibility, more oversight, a better public image, and lower shipping costs. General Motors, Whirlpool, Ford, and Caterpillar have already brought home a portion of their manufacturing, finding a need to improve service and move closer to the consumer. In addition, they find increasingly a skilled workforce in our neighbors north and south. But the real game changer in reshoring is lower costs for raw materials from ramped up fossil fuel refining, which could create a dynamic new manufacturing era in North America. And you notice where we were just a very short time ago here in terms of shale gas production and where we're headed today. This is we wouldn't have even been talking about shale gas and its impacts on the transportation system 5 years ago, but it's changing everything now. Furthermore, as a new development, 3D printing becomes, as 3D printing becomes more prevalent and technology advances, the effect on the supply chain could be historic. Will there be a decrease in the movement of finished goods and more of an emphasis on raw materials? Certainly, Amazon and Walmart are thinking about this right now. In 2000, shale gas provided only 1% of U.S. natural gas production. By 2011, it was 34%. Forecasters estimate that by 2040, 50% of America's natural gas supply will come from shale gas. The increased availability of low-cost source chemicals, massive byproducts of the refining process, is offering incentive for manufacturers to shorten their supply chains, which is increasing the need for rail and trucking to move more products domestically and for shipping exports abroad. Since 2010, the U.S. has claimed the position as the largest natural gas producer in the world. With this comes new challenges for our trade corridors, as infrastructure to export this energy product, for the most part, do not exist. The boom in, try to cite a LNG or CNG terminal anywhere to port. I know you guys have struggled with that in California. It's tough, and yet that's what we've got to learn a way to do this. The boom in output creates opportunities across many sectors, but the strain on the system is evidenced by deteriorating roads in shale regions and clogged choke points throughout the freight system. And let's not forget the freight capacity that's being squeezed by the boom in the transport of crude oil by rail. These demands are part of our future, and we must deal with it. Other changes in markets include the opening up of many of the world's developing economies. NAFTA, now celebrating its 20th anniversary, was a precursor to the 20 free trade agreements in which the United States now has with other nations. Free trade agreements foster communication across borders, create jobs, harness economic growth, and encourage energy development. These agreements increase trade and, in turn, increase pressure on goods movement providers to quickly and cost-effectively move cargo into, out of, and through the United States. For example, the ambitious Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, now under development, will support the creation and retention of jobs as well as foster economic growth, but it will also put a strain on California's ports and their associated landside infrastructure as they work to accommodate a shift in goods movement patterns. Another fact that cannot be overlooked when discussing changing trade patterns is the expansion of the Panama Canal, which is opening in 2015. Much has been made of the canal in terms of negative impacts on West Coast ports, but the canal also opens up profitable trade routes between the West Coast and Brazil, one of the world's largest emerging markets. No one can accurately predict how the canal expansion will affect shipper choices or which ports will gain or lose, but one trend is certain. Shipping lines are retiring smaller vessels at a rapid pace, making way for the largest neo-Panamax carriers and pushing bigger vessel sizes down the line. While it is clear that not every port will need the depth, berths, cranes, and connections to accommodate 15,000 TEU calls, the newer, large-capacity ships will displace smaller ones throughout the system, and this cascade effect will challenge ports on all three coasts. Given these challenges in today's global economy, the United States infrastructure realities cannot be viewed in a vacuum. A renewed commitment to investment in goods movement infrastructure and dedicated funding for a freight program is critical to America to ensure safe, efficient, reliable, multimodal supply chains that will continue to stoke the engine of commerce and support job growth. To say the fight for goods movement in America is standing still would be untrue, and there is a considerable amount of optimism among infrastructure funding advocates, as well as positive developments in Congress and the administration that do bring hope. One justification for this kind of happy thinking is the Water Resources Bill currently in conference. Historically, a Water Resources Bill is passed every 2 years and authorizes projects that deal with water resources, environmental, structural, and navigation issues, flood protection, and hydrology studies. In the past, the bill has also contained set-aside funding or earmarks for select projects. Since the moratorium on earmarking began, this important legislation has not passed, and the first positive movement to do so began last year for the first time since 2007. The legislation is of critical importance to ports, which need funding to complete projects related to deepening berths, maintaining navigable channels, and making waterside improvements. The Senate passed the upper chamber's legislation back in May, and on October 23, 2013, the House of Representatives secured an astounding 417 votes to advance their bill. This is a House that couldn't agree to turn on a light switch this time last year. Late last year, the respective chambers appointed their conferees, and advocates are hopeful that a final version gets passed early this spring. There are still a few differences between the bills that need resolving. For starters, the Senate bill comes with a price tag of $5.7 billion for the fiscal years from 2014 to 18. The House bill sets spending levels at $3.5 billion for the same fiscal year period. The Senate bill includes modest reforms, funds flood control and navigation projects through the Army Corps of Engineers, and finances a pilot water infrastructure finance and innovation authority program. This program would provide large water projects with low interest loan rates. On the other hand, the House bill deauthorizes $12 billion in old inactive projects. The legislation also accelerates project delivery, establishes a public-private partnership program, and mandates harbor maintenance trust fund spending equal to 80% of the receipts annually. By contrast, the Senate proposal increases spending to 100% of receipts annually. Though the Water Resources Bill is not yet a finished matter, many legislators have already begun turning to the impending Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, which distributes money to states for road construction and highway improvement programs, authorizes road safety programs, and to a very limited extent has distributed money to multimodal projects through federal competitive grant programs. The current authorization, called Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, or MAP 21, was a 2-year bill set to expire October 1, 2014. Typically, surface transportation authorizations are 5 or 6 years in duration, but due to diminishing resources from motor fuel taxes, the bill was set at 2 years, which still required general fund contributions that were quite significant. The $105 billion 2-year bill included many regulations, but no significant changes to the overall level of funding. The bill was truly a landmark for freight interests, however. For the first time, the U.S. has a national freight policy called for. It also called for the designation of a primary freight network. The mapping of a national strategic freight plan was called for, and the development of freight conditions and performance report. Due to the bill's jurisdiction evolution, much of the policy is highway-focused, but each surface transportation bill can build upon the progress of another before it until we have a widely accepted multimodal perspective. Hopefully, the next surface transportation authorization will include dedicated funding for freight infrastructure and for freight policy that builds upon MAP 21's groundwork. Though the specifics have not yet been announced, Senate Chairwoman Barbara Boxer announced her intent to have a bill before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, of which she is the chairperson, by April. Senator Boxer has demonstrated through her commitments and her ambitious timeline that this bill is a top priority for her this year, and the approval of her ranking member, Senator David Vitter, bodes well for a potential bipartisan product. On the House side, the Committee of Jurisdiction made a landmark announcement in creating a 6-month special panel on 21st century freight transportation. This panel concluded its work in October of 2013 and released a series of recommendations, including the call to identify a revenue source for freight infrastructure funding. The designation of a multimodal freight transportation network was also part of their agenda, and they called for a sustained freight-focused projects of national and regional significance discretionary grant program. The bipartisan report was decidedly more substantial, pointed, and cohesive than previous signals from Congress, and the recommendations reinforce what our coalition has advocated for years. We are committed to seeing the Freight Panel's recommendations enacted in the upcoming Surface Transportation Authorization. In conclusion, America has an infrastructure deficit. At an earlier point in time, the collective belief in our nation's manifest destiny spurred construction of massive transportation projects and visionary infrastructure that our commerce depends on today. The current haphazard approach to investment, undertaken without consideration for the impact of one project or region on the entire system, does not adequately serve our nation's economic needs and does not make the most of the limited federal dollars available. The upcoming months will be pivotal to ensuring the United States is prepared to handle commerce in the 21st century. And with your help and our continued advocacy, we hope we'll get Washington to focus on both these challenges and the vast opportunities that lie ahead. And I thank you. I'm happy to take a few questions. Do we have time?
Yes, you do.
Good. Any questions from the audience?
Leslie, here in California, we're increasingly looking at the electrical grid as a factor in the functionality of our ports. Are you seeing that on a national level?
Actually, that's a great question because, the whole issue of the question was, I don't know if you all heard him, but the impact of the deficiencies in the electric grid on the transportation infrastructure and its potential. Actually, the problems associated with less than adequate electrical grids throughout North America is a really profound problem, and most people don't think of it in transportation terms. But here we are advocating the use of more electric vehicles, more electric-powered freight facilities, certainly coal downing at ports, and many other potentially extensive investments in ordinary passenger traffic as we move toward getting more interactive vehicles that can talk to each other and actually talk to the roadway. So we're going to be looking at needing to power up large stretches of roads in order to be able to support the IT infrastructure that will make our roads safer and more fuel efficient. The potential demands on the electric system is huge, but you all are making the connection much faster out here than I think is being made in other places. I think these are largely being discussed in stovepipe ways, which really doesn't serve our best interest, I think.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi.
Question. How much progress, both Schuster and Boxer have said that they're currently writing the next transportation bill. How much progress do you think can actually be made in advance of the elections in November?
Well, that's the 64 billion and a half question. And every time I make a prediction about this, the next day I think exactly the opposite. I decided I completely should go back on making whatever the prediction was either way. The fact is that you do have a midterm election, which is very, very important to the Republicans. They are certainly hoping to increase their majority in the House. They would like to take back the Senate. They are not particularly inclined, even in the most benign circumstances, to increase taxes. And without having a gas tax increase or a massive contribution from the general fund, there literally will be no money. There will be nothing to authorize. So I think there is that part of it makes it especially challenging in this election go around. That being said, it will be embarrassing September 30th if the current surface transportation authorization expires. If it is just extended, there will still have to be a very significant contribution from the general fund. The money literally stops October 15th. The trust fund will go bankrupt. So they can't do one and they can't do the other without putting them at odds with their constituencies that are very conservative on federal spending or federal tax increases. So that's the big challenge. I think that there is an increasing recognition in Congress that transportation is the role of the federal government. We don't have a lot of roles for the federal government specified in the Constitution, but the Commerce Clause does indicate that the federal government has the responsibility for ensuring both commerce among the states as well as with foreign markets. And I think that we probably in the freight community have the best argument of all for encouraging our elected officials to support a investment wherever the money has to come from in freight infrastructure. But will that be enough to carry the day, and which will be the lesser painful approach? I don't know, but I think there is a lot of motivation to try to get a bill written. Whether they can get it passed through a conference to the president's desk before September 30th is a huge question, a very open-ended.
Leslie?
Yes.
Since you serve on the Department of Commerce Council on Supply Chain Competitiveness Committee, do you want to talk a little bit about the work that's being done there?
Sure, I'd love to. And I'll also mention the committee that you serve on, Fran. Yeah, the one of the innovative things, and it's always interesting to me, these organizations that are enshrined as institutions that kind of, you think maybe they never read their letterhead. The Department of Commerce. For many years, in fact, I'll tell an anecdote here very quickly since I think we have a few minutes. I remember being in Washington with the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce for your fly-in, and this was about the year 2002 maybe. It was a long time ago, and the Secretary of Commerce at that time was addressing the group, which was really, I think that his staff didn't tell him who this group was, because it was largely made up of transportation advocates from the Los Angeles region, multimodal, road, rail, air, everything. But it was the body of the group, certainly the very largest portion, was focused on transportation. Well, he came and gave an extended speech about international property rights and issues with piracy of Hollywood movies in China. And the speech was very good and to the point, only it really had very little relevance to most of the people who were sitting in the audience. So some person bravely got up at the end and asked him about a question about, well, since the Department of Commerce is responsible for negotiating free trade agreements, and you do all of our trade negotiations. Do you ever talk about how the transportation infrastructure has to support the goods movement called for in the trade agreements? And the Commerce Secretary paused for a very long time, looked straight at the person, and started talking about national property rights and intellectual piracy in China. And there was no connection for him. He really didn't understand it at all. Coming here, fast forward 10 years, the Department of Commerce noticed that on their letterhead they're responsible for commerce, and they decided to set up an advisory committee about 2 years ago that is called the Advisory Committee for Supply Chain Competitiveness. And it drew together a number of private sector as well as some public sector organizations to collaborate on what should be our approaches, especially in support of the President's Export Initiative, because the need to provide better solutions. And if we're able to get goods moving, of course, for exports, we're also making improvements to imports. It didn't mean that we were not supposed to pay attention to that, but that was since the issue of supply chain infrastructure overall is really more in the Department of Transportation's purview, that the Export Initiative gave Commerce the excuse to, well, let's get into this transportation business here. So we have been meeting for a little over a year now, working on such things as the question of the clearances that are required for goods that are either being exported or imported, and the barriers through customs and so forth on that. We're also working on such things as freight funding and infrastructure and those needs. There are other committees that are working on the question of freight policy and how the Department of Commerce can work with the Department of Transportation on setting up national freight policy. So it's a very interesting group, and I'm very satisfied that this is happening. Not too long after the Department of Commerce put together the Supply Chain Advisory Committee, the Department of Transportation acted on a suggestion by a West Coast senator. It was Senator Cantwell from Washington State, who asked the Department of Transportation to start a private sector advisory committee for the Department of Transportation to focus on freight infrastructure. And Fran is on that, and I think she's going to be telling you more about that in a little while. But they're doing really, really good work, and I think we can all hope for some more progress there.
Hi, Leslie.
Yeah, hi.
You may have already partially answered it, but just to maybe be more pointed with the question regarding trade agreements, more mature trade agreements like NAFTA, impending trade agreements like TPP. What can't these trade agreements have any impact, positive impact on freight mobility, freight infrastructure?
Yeah, I think they can, and this is one reason why it's really important that the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and Department of State as well, and others who are negotiating treaties of this nature need to, the trade agreement may be 1,300 pages or so long, and there'll be one line in the embedded in the trade agreement that says, and transportation infrastructure will be commensurate with the demand for goods, services to be moved. And that'll be it. I mean, there's literally no thought or further follow-up given even to this. And I think that this is a gap. It's a gap in appreciation for our transportation system. I think a lot of people, including people at the federal level who should care about this, think like many Americans do, that transportation infrastructure is like air. It's just there. You breathe it. They don't think about how it gets there. They don't think about the fact that it may not be adequate to their needs in a short period of time if we don't invest. And certainly, I think our government leaders fall into that category as well.
Yes, hi, thank you. With the state and regional freight plans that are being developed, how do you see them affecting the national plan and helping to kind of drive the discussion in Washington rather than being isolated individual state plans?
Right. Oh, that's a great question because Again, that's another place where a gap exists. Congress told every state, you are encouraged. They say to the Department of Transportation, encourage them to do a state freight plan. Now, I don't know, what do you do? Give them a lollipop or something if they do it? There's no indication of how the Department of Commerce is to, or the Department of Transportation is to encourage states to do freight plans. But a lot of them actually got the joke right away and have stepped up and have started really seriously focusing on state freight plans. So there actually are a lot of these being developed. But then the other aspect that Congress sort of, didn't say what you're supposed to do with the state freight plan after it's done. It didn't say to DOT what DOT was supposed to do with it and how they should, or even whether they should receive copies, so to speak, of the state freight plan. There was literally no, path left by Congress in their instructions through the legislation to do this. So hopefully what will happen is that DOT will take the initiative themselves and start very actively coordinating with the states to gather the plans in a way and encourage also states to work together, because if you have a plan that stops at the Nevada border, for example, and Nevada has a completely different plan, not identifying the same roads or facilities and so forth, this will not work. So there needs to be a lot of coordination between the states, and the federal government is in a position to do that. I think the DOT is thinking along these lines. But then within 2 years' time, DOT was required in the legislation to come up with a national strategic freight plan. So, it's going to be a very interesting task to see how they collate all these states that have produced state plans into one national plan, or if they even use them at all to make the national plan. And no one knows. No one knows, but I hope that they will. It is quite likely, though, that they will get real apples and oranges, though, when they all come in, because there's a good likelihood that they will look at different things, and you will find that it's very hard to match them up when push comes to shove. So, I don't know. Well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed talking with you. Please feel free when you're in Washington to give me a call.